In 2012, which was the last full year of Swami Kriyananda's life, most of you know this is a picture of Kriyananda. He's an American man. He was a direct disciple of Yogananda. And Yogananda we're celebrating because 102 years ago, we had it all set to do it at the century mark, but the little virus had its own opinion, and that changed everything. But 102 years ago, Yogananda came from India. Master, I call him, and I will call him this weekend, but just so you know who I'm talking about. He sailed into Boston Harbor to begin a spiritual revolution, basically, or to carry it out at the behest of all of these masters, especially Babaji. Baba means father. Babaji simply means respected father, which is sort of a title, not a name. And he is reputed to be, I believe he is, a deathless master, still living in the Himalayas, still watching over the world. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Master says, anyone who says the name of Babaji with true reverence attracts to himself or herself an instant blessing. These are big promises that I do not make on my own authority. You will hear me continuously referring to Master said, and more often even Swamiji, Swami Kriyananda. Swami means teacher, the same J-I, respected teacher. And since 1969, when Swamiji walked into a room where I was sitting, actually it was a tent, but it was a room. It was behind the Beta Chi fraternity house at Stanford University. I was a proud dropout of Stanford University at that point. I was an early adapter, is that what you call it? One of the first in my crowd to leave college and squander my parents' money, but nonetheless, that's what I did. 1 year, never went back. I held on through high school, thinking once I was able to get into that university, it wasn't as impossible to get into as it is now. It was competitive, but not insane like it is now. And they actually talk to you in person. And if you give me a chance, I can talk my way into just about anything. So I talked my way into Stanford on the hope, and I didn't understand this until later. I had the words. I got the words later. I was looking for wisdom, and what they offered me was knowledge. They offered me intelligence, lots of very, very intelligent people there, but they were only offering me knowledge. And I had no ambitions. Let me phrase it differently. I had intense ambitions, but I had no place to put them. And university had nothing to do with anything that I wanted. In the first 2 weeks, actually lasted about 2 weeks. It was 1965, that's when it would have been. And so they had a class called consciousness, because people were changing their consciousness, not by meditation, but by substances. We'll just sort of leave it there. That was the time. Dambara, who was one of the gentlemen singing here, just turned 70 yesterday, and he said he had a T-shirt that said, I lived through the 60s twice, which some of us did, okay? But I got into this class on consciousness, which I thought was actually going to tell me something I wanted to know. And I realized that all they wanted to do was exchange other opinions, other people's opinions. And it was extremely depressing for me, actually, to just realize that I'd finally gotten somewhere where I thought people would know something about what I wanted to know, which was life, and much more profoundly, simply happiness. It seemed to me like so self-evident that what we all ought to be doing was looking for happiness. And I was so astonished that nobody seemed to know that. When I was much younger, I thought maybe that all the adults knew it and that I would reach a certain age and they would tell me. I grew up in a Jewish family. I thought maybe it had something to do with the bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah sort of moment. I watched my older brother go through it and nothing seemed to happen. But I still had hope, and I had a lovely family. We were very intelligent. But wisdom was something else, completely something else. And I was lucky enough at the age of 18 that the whole world was breaking open at that period of time. And so somebody handed me books from Sri Ramakrishna, which is a wonderful spiritual line, Swami Vivekananda. I opened those books, Vivekananda's books especially, because he was very brainy. I liked intelligence. It was sort of a hobby of mine, has been a hobby my whole life. It just made sense to me. I didn't know really about reincarnation, but I became a believer pretty fast, because how did I just know? How did it seem so familiar? I grew up in Texas. I was in a Jewish family in El Paso, Texas, and 3 years later, I opened a book by Swami Vivekananda, and I say, sure, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. But there was a real problem, a super problem that I had, which was now I had all these really big ideas, and I knew that there was actually a purpose in life, and there were simple truths that I could follow, but I couldn't figure out how to get my feet on the ground in a new reality. It was just, I was still just going to work, coming home, seeing my friends, going to bed, getting up, going to work, seeing my friends, just like this. So I thought I would go crazy. I mean, really, literally, my karmic inclination is to just slip a mental cog. I have a lot of sympathy for that. And I remember standing, I lived in this apartment then in San Francisco, and we looked out on a back garden, and I literally remember standing there considering whether I should just slip into madness. Now, I'm just working with reincarnation as if you all agree with me, but I've tested this theory in my life for 50 years, and I'm very convinced, and I'm not the only one who thinks this way, but I could feel that this is an option. Much later in my life, much later, when I was close with Swami Kriyananda and had the opportunity to ask him all kinds of questions. And several of my friends at that point had taken a little episode, a little departure from reality episode. And we were just talking about it, and he said, very seriously, oh yes, often on your quest for divine truth, you spend an incarnation or two or three or four where what happens is you get a little glimpse of what this is really going to take. This is not going to be just distracting ourselves, making ourselves happy, being successful, having money, being comfortable, whatever it might be. This is real hand-to-hand combat with my personal limitations until I triumph in the light. And so there comes a point where you see what you're up against and you decide, I think I'll just take a little holiday. I'll just try something else. And I don't make light of the suffering that causes, not even slightly. But Swami Kriyananda actually said to me, it's a natural stage as the soul progresses. Because we have to really become convinced that there is no alternative, that there is one road to happiness, and this is it, come what may. So I remember standing there, looking out the window. Now I'm full of these metaphysical ideas, just gigantic ideas, and I was going to the local metaphysical bookstore, which was the only way you could get information at that time, and I went to the one called Saints and Masters and Yogis, the shelf, and I just started reading across the shelf like this. Like, how did they do it? Oh, well, this one went, to the jungles of Borneo and was a Christian missionary. This ancient yogi lived in the Himalayas and ate nothing but nettles. This one went into a cloistered Catholic monastery. That one was really hard. I couldn't do that one. You can be Jewish and be a yogi, but it's a little hard to be a Catholic nun and be Jewish. That's a harder one to make. None of it. I just couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. And I knew something was there and I couldn't find it. So I thought about just taking a mental holiday. And this is again where it wasn't my first experience of the belief in reincarnation, but it was very close. I thought, oh, if I have a mental breakdown, it'll cause a huge commotion among all my friends, and they'll come and get me, and they'll take me to some sanitarium somewhere, and everybody will work with me for a really long time, and then gradually I'll accept that I have to come back into this world, and I'll ground myself in reality, and then I'll come and I'll be standing looking out this window. And I'll be poorer and tireder and older, but not any wiser. It's the beginning of understanding. Now, why do things happen to us? Why do we ever meet people who can help us? Why do we find books? Swami Kriyananda, in his autobiography, The Path, he tells the story of being such an intense truth seeker that he was willing to give up absolutely everything in the search for truth. And he came from a very fine family. He was close, they raised him well, and he was especially close to his mother. And this was like 1948. His father was a geologist who worked for Standard Oil and was being sent off to Egypt. He worked mostly in countries other than the US, except during the Second World War. So he went off to Egypt. Swami packs up his mother's house, puts her on a boat to Egypt. And this is like no cell phones, no internet. So his parents are in the middle of the Atlantic, just heading off. He comes in and finds Autobiography of a Yogi. And one of the ways, he has many ways of describing the effect of that picture, which is on the cover of Autobiography. But one of the ways that Swami said it, which rings in the hearts of many of us, Swamiji said he always felt that he lived in a world that nobody else understood or shared. But when he read Autobiography of a Yogi, he recognized that Yogananda lived in the same world that he lived in. How do you know these things? Yogananda grew up in India. All the stories are of meeting these yogis and nothing actually matched, but everything matched. And so Swami Kriyananda dropped everything, 22 years old, crossed the United States from New York City to Los Angeles, and said to Yogananda, once they said, "Hello, how are you? What can I do for you?" He said, "I want to be your disciple." And Swamiji himself said, I never even imagined that I would say such a thing to another human being. He said, because I had never met anyone that I felt I could trust in that way. And for the rest of his life. And Yogananda only lived 3.5 years. Swami Kriyananda was not 26 years old when his guru was gone. But for the rest of his life, he never wavered like that. I was sitting in the room. I was 22 also, as it happened, just by divine coincidence. I was sitting in that tent where the Beta Kai people usually had their drunken beer bashes. I have no idea why they invited a Swami, except it was the 60s in San Francisco, and that's what we did, But somebody thought it would be fun, I guess, or something. So he walks in, and he was such a mixture of things. He spoke perfect English and no accented English. Most of the Swamis at that time were coming from India, and for most of our American ears, they were a little hard to understand. Kriyananda spoke perfect English. His background was not dissimilar to the rest of us. But that wasn't what captured me. What captured me, and these are the words I use now, was his vibration, his magnetism, his consciousness. I don't know where it came from. Except if I hadn't been faithful to it for 50 years, you might have thought it was impulsive. But he just walked in. He didn't speak before he spoke, before he said a word. I could tell for the first time in my life, I was looking at what I wanted to be. And that's the essence of the problem for so many people in the world, is that our heroes, our celebrities, our politicians, you see I have trouble saying this word, politicians, right? The people who have power and influence and notoriety in our world, They're not. Some of them are better than others, but amazing, amazing what times we're living in. Now, Swami Kriyananda made this wonderful picture of what's going on our planet right now, which I think is very, very helpful. There are many stories, and you don't even have to hear them to understand. Anybody who's paying any attention can see that everything is shifting so fast. You know, I'm old enough now. When I first started doing this, being a vegetarian, meditating, eventually going off into the hills, yoga like that, we were nuts. We were totally nuts. We were lunatic fringe, which I was always extremely proud of. There's nicer words. You can call yourselves the cutting edge, the early adopters, but lunatic fringe is my favorite, absolutely. It's partly the family I was raised in. When you're raised in an intellectual Jewish family, you're raised to think for yourself, which is what I said to my dad when he was a little displeased with some of the things I thought. Dad, you raised me this way. What did you expect? I thought you'd be proud. He was a little embarrassed, so he was proud, so we had to just leave it at that. But nonetheless, it was all so odd, you know? No, not at all. I mean, how many just of these wonderful organic vegan restaurants? You just walk down the street, I saw 4 or 5 of them like that. When we started, I had to make my own bread, make my own yogurt, make my own ice cream, make my own granola. You know, why would I bother now? I can buy it better. But nobody ever heard of it. And out of the soil, who made the decision? Who decided? Who mandated it? Nobody did. We did. We, collectively, began to see another reality. And we, collectively, have pushed that reality onto the society, completely without organization or plan or pickets or anything like that. We just did it because that's the world that we see and that's the world we want to live in. And what is happening on this planet now, as Swamiji talked about it, I was saying this, there's this whole shift. We're moving into a new age. This has been going on for a long time. And some of it has been quite flaky and extremely entertaining, you know, lots of different theories out there, but this is a very ancient tradition. Yogananda writes about it in Autobiography of a Yogi. On the table back there, there's a book called The Yugas, Y-U-G-A-S. Yugas is the Indian word for these great ages. It's a wonderful book written by friends of mine, full disclosure, but that's still a really good book. And it just talks about we are moving out of the age of matter, dogmatism, separation, into an age of unity. Well, duh. I mean, that is what's happening, isn't it? Everywhere it's happening, and all of this technology. And then this is how Swami puts it, though, in a bigger picture. There is tremendous uprush of powerful cosmic energy coming into the planet now, and everybody feels it. That's why the changes happen so fast. You know, just families are different, generations divide, things that used to be just stable and unquestioned are completely confused. There's this tremendous amount of energy, and everybody feels it. And we're more or less dividing into 2 groups. And one group, which is us, and us is a very big word. I'm standing in front of these masters because this is my way of understanding. But we don't own this. This is cosmic energy that's coming in, and we, light workers is a lovely word for it, we understand that this energy is descending from a higher plane of consciousness, and we have the opportunity to open ourselves and cooperate with that. And that means moving toward unity, toward kindness, toward happiness, towards freedom, toward everything that we understand as good, that is truly happiness producing. But that energy itself is just energy. And it can be used, you know, the nuclear energy can either blow up and kill hundreds of thousands of people in one swell whoop, or it can be used to power cities in a positive way. It's just energy. And it filters through whatever vibration we are, and it's used. And so at the same time that many of us are sensing that this is an energy that's calling us to self-transformation, to uplift, to share, and to bless, many others are feeling that energy and are using it for power, for money, for sensual indulgence, even for violence, for war, for destruction. And that's just a fact. You don't need these masters or me to tell you that. If you have a brain and you're paying any attention, it's just astonishing. On one hand, we see goodness like we've never seen before, generosity and awakening like we've never seen before, and that we remember. And on the other hand, you just can't believe it. How could people be so confused? But there you have it, don't you? And all of us who were born at this time, well, I have a favorite saying, which is, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Because we never do anything that we don't think is going to help us move toward happiness and move away from suffering. When Yogananda landed in this place in 1920, he brought with him a little book, which I think he published here as soon as he got here. It was called Science of Religion. He was trying to bring together the idea that religion is not dogma, it is actual experience. That was the premise, that is the premise of meditation, basically, is that you don't just have to believe, you can actually experience. So he wanted to get that element, the experimental element, because that's really what true science is. Science isn't about cell division or anything like that. It's not. It's experiment proves the theory. So he wanted to say that, look, you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to take the priest's word for it. You don't even need the priest. You don't need any intermediaries. And he used the wonderful phrase, the only place that God can be experienced is the human nervous system. I have a love for language, and I don't want that sentence to end, the human nervous system. You want the only place God can be experienced, and you want something beautiful and poetic and just magnificent, which he provides, Yogananda provides. But the human nervous system, I've come to love the phrase, though, because you start out thinking this is so far away from me, and then it just comes right back to where I'm standing. So in this little booklet, Science of Religion, which later was actually ghost written by one of his disciples, because he didn't speak English that well then, Swami Kriyananda rewrote it and called it God is for Everyone. I have to always put that plug in. The problem is Swami Kriyananda has written 140 books. I got to read them one at a time. It was a little easier on me than it is those who came later, but nonetheless. But the premise is so simple. The science of religion is this: everybody wants happiness, nobody wants to suffer. There it is. And the wonderful thing about that, you see, is that gives equal respect to everybody. Because we are sharing this planet at this time, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. Apparently, when we're in the astral world and we decide to take a physical body, we actually have a choice. Well, that's not exactly true. What I really mean is, we don't have a choice because we're not free. We're compelled by our karma. We're compelled by what we don't know. We're compelled by our ignorance. That's what I actually mean. We're compelled by all the things that we still think will make us happy, and we get to have the chance to find out if it's true. This whole planet is a giant experiment. And when we choose to incarnate at a time like this, we thought it was a really good idea. And we thought it was a good idea because, and this is also an unpleasant truth, an easy life is not necessarily a victorious one. And when we're not in it, just thinking about it, challenge looks like a good idea. And so it seemed like a good idea at the time, that I would come to this planet at this time when it's going to be turbulent and chaotic. And that I'm not going to be able to just hunker down and have everything run in this predictable way. the little self, the ego self, the part of us that identifies small, thinks that good equals easy and pleasurable. I mean, just when we think about it, we always use the word good because it pleases me. And we think bad is when something happens that we wished hadn't happened. And you know, Om Shanti spoke right at the beginning about something that apparently I said that had an impact, which I'm very glad that it did. It's had an impact on me, that's why I said it, which is none of this is here for any reason except to give us the opportunity to get bigger. And you know, we just, when it's actually happening, we have a different opinion all the time. And the art of the spiritual path is to recognize that good, first of all, good is what my karma brings me. And if we want to be devotees, which is handy, I suggest it, good is what God sends me. That somebody is actually in charge here. But all of this, the people on this planet, and this is so hard to understand, they're all God's children. We're all God's children. My pleasant way of saying it now, having passed through more negative concepts, is that Divine Mother has a lot of rowdy children right now. But if divine love is unconditional, if God loves all his children equally, that means that even the most rowdy among us right now are not rejected by the divine. That's a very helpful tactic because that means that we're not rejected either. We're never rejected, we're just loved. I was saying at the beginning, you know, the divine just is constantly, there's a constant light, infinite light, which is ours to receive. It's just a question of whether we have the courage, the discipline, the open-heartedness, the generosity to receive it, and whether we have figured out what causes suffering and what brings happiness. And so there's a lot of our rowdy brothers and sisters out there who are experimenting. They're answering this question. Ego aggrandizement, over-sensuality, lots of money, hurting other people, gaining power, misusing it, disregarding the planet. How is that working for you? And they'll get to find out. And those of us who have already understood that this energy is here for self-expansion, for generosity, for joy, and are at least on the road to trying to learn how to do that. The problem is we've been mother's rowdy children too. And so we have all of those karmic forces that are confusing us. That's why we have to come together. We're a very tiny minority of the planet, a very tiny minority. You know, there's a lot of people doing a lot of other things in this building right now. You know, what to speak of this whole city. It's just everybody has a little piece of it. And we have this responsibility. This responsibility to whom? To ourselves, really. We can be devotees, we can feel responsible to the masters, we can feel responsible to God. But all of those words are just words until they really become who we are. And this is what spiritual power is. I saw in the little brochure I'm supposed to answer 5 questions. I think it's my assignment for the whole weekend, so I'm not going to feel like I have to answer all of them. Spiritual power is just us. It's just who you are, period. And the question is simply, how much do I have? How capable am I of directing it? It's spiritual in the sense that the life force is just there, but it's not spiritual for existing. It's just the way things are. There's a wonderful word in the Indian tradition, which 2 words, Sanatan Dharma, which the word Hinduism was an imposition on India by the British because they looked so different than the British, they needed to give them a name, and because the British thought in terms of religion, and their religion looked so different, they called them Hindus, supposedly because of the Indus River there. I don't know if this is exactly the story, but something like that. Because the true tradition of India is called Sanatana Dharma, which has a couple of definitions. Dharma is a word that you hear. It means either eternal religion, or my favorite, I like better, is that which is. Or just that which is. It's not the priests who tell you what is, or save you from what is. It's just the way we're made. And this is the fundamental reality of life, is that certain things cause us misery and other ways of being make us happy. But our awareness is incomplete. So it always seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, it doesn't really absolve me of the consequences of my stupidity, but it makes me feel slightly calmer about it. Because I realized, just what can you do? It seemed like a good idea at the time. And when we watch these people doing really awful things, God doesn't love them less for what they do, nor should we. But that doesn't mean we can change them or we should condone what they do. We were talking about this earlier. We were talking about raising children. And when a mother sees a child misbehaving, the mother or the father gives that child the consequences of its wrong behavior, because it's not love unless you do that. So if we think that Divine Mother is not going to discipline her rowdy children, we're wrong. Their own actions will bring them consequences, which is why Om Shanti heard me say that. It doesn't matter what happens to us. What happens to us is the result of the karma we set in motion. What matters is, what do I do about it now? Do I allow it to cause me to become angry and small and afraid and closed-hearted and revengeful? Or do I use it to try to understand on a deeper level what really brings happiness, what really causes suffering? That's all we ever want to know. That's why I was so bewildered as a child. Now, I was very well brought up, so I have to be fair. My parents inculcated in me profound and wonderful values that I'm extremely grateful for. My parents are not living anymore, but I made a point of telling them at the end of their lives. I wrote to my father, you raised 3 children and not one of us can drop even a Kleenex on the sidewalk. You know, we never litter. It's a small thing, but it was indicative of very strong energy. But they themselves didn't really understand what caused suffering and what caused happiness on the level that I wanted to know it. You know, so that's what we really are looking for. That's what spiritual energy, that's what spiritual life is. The energy just comes to us. How am I going to use it? And tomorrow we'll talk, I believe it's tomorrow, we talk more about superconsciousness per se. But in a very simple terms, there's 2 sides to us. There was this little girl, we have a school where I live in Palo Alto. We founded a kindergarten through middle school. One of the really strong-willed little kindergarten kids came in one day, and she was just being a holy terror. She was just impossible. And finally, the teacher took her aside and said, you know, what is with you today? Oh, she said, every day I come to school and there's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. Usually I listen to the angel, but today I'm listening to the devil. At least she was honest. I mean, that's a real answer, isn't it? Basically, that's where we are. Subconscious, which means not quite like Freud or Jung meant it, but all of that, which is just the habit that's behind us, that's the way we've always done it, that hasn't really worked at all, but at least it's familiar. That pulls us one way. On the other side is who we can become. It's all about awareness. A whole spiritual path just comes down to one word, and that word is awareness. What are we aware of? And how are we responding? That's what superconsciousness is. It's our potential. And the conscious mind, there are these 3 levels, subconscious, conscious, and superconscious. This is the battleground. This is where the expansive, upward-moving, let's go to the light energy meets the, but I'm so comfortable where I am. And all my little habits of annoyance and resentment, and it's really your fault, and I wasn't wrong at all. It's, I would have been good if you hadn't been so bad. I mean, we have all these ways of doing it, you know? And then after a while, you just catch the wave. You just figure out, even if I'm tempted, I know what the result of that one's going to be, and I'm not going to go there. When we, in the last year of Swami's life, 2012, I think I started back here a long time ago, I hear that phrase, we made a movie about our community, Ananda village, which is in the Sierra Nevada, above Sacramento, near Lake Tahoe there in California. We called it Finding Happiness. About 4 movies came out that year, and they all had a name like Finding Happiness, something real close to that. I got drawn into helping with that film, which if I hadn't already had a whole life, I probably would have run to Hollywood to become a movie maker. I really loved it. And I was involved in helping with the script, just what we were going to say and how we were going to say it. And part of that, if you haven't seen that movie, it's very easy to find, and I highly recommend it. We might even have it showing on a screen back there. A couple of times in the movie, we had a choir like this come up, except for the film, we dressed them all in really pretty colors, bright. We always wear really bright colors and scarves, and everybody looks so clean and nice. And we sang happy songs, you know, there's joy in the heavens, a smile on the mountain, you know, just really happy songs. And we had a Hollywood crew. We had a Hollywood director, a very good friend, Ted Nicolau. He came up and he brought his crew. So we, and they liked us and we liked them, but we were really two species. And then we hired some publicity people. And for some reason, when they did they did focus groups. I think they had the director's cut, I think if I have the words right, and they had focus groups in Los Angeles to just sort of see what people thought of the film. And as it happened, for some reason, I was the only Ananda representative who could go to Los Angeles and be part of that. And that seems odd to me, but anyway, that's what happened. So I was there, and then the next morning we're all talking about this, and these are very nice people, but Hollywood types. I was the only Ananda person. It was probably the first time they had been alone with just one. And they sort of, everyone kind of looked around, and then somebody leaned across and said to me, "Do you all really do that?" I said, "You mean dress up in bright colors and sing happy songs? Yeah, we do it all the time." It was just like, well, you know, why don't you come to my house? We have a lot more fun. It was just so hard for them to understand, you know, because it just wasn't their world. And again, these were lovely people. We all really were all friends. But their vibration was different. And, you know, spiritual energy is just a particular vibration. It's just energy, and all of energy is a vibration, and we begin to choose. What vibration am I really going to move into? Ananda is not really a thing or an institution. It's becoming a little more like one, unfortunately. I've been in it for 50 years, so I remember when it wasn't. It's actually was better when it wasn't, because the only way you could understand what Ananda was intuitively. We had almost no structures. We lived, the word we liked was simple, but the actual true word was primitive. We lived in a very primitive manner. Swamiji dragged us out of the mud. But it was a knowing in your heart that I'm responding to life in a way that will make me feel like my life was worth living. You know, because it all ends, maybe no one has told you, but it all ends when we die, right? People are very tender about this. I'm not at all tender about it. Of course we're going to die. What do you think is going to happen here? It's going to end. And when that moment comes, you have nothing but your consciousness. Nothing. Nothing. I've had the privilege of being at the deathbed of a number of people. It's wonderful. It's just like being there when they're born. It's a fabulous experience. But it's very vivid because it's all gone. And what you have is your consciousness. If people really knew that, think how differently we'd live. Yeah, because it's the only thing you can really store up. It's your chakras. There's a whole lot of metaphysics behind it. Doesn't mean you can't live. That's what Yogananda came in 1920 and sailed into the Boston Harbor. You can live, you can marry, you can have children, you can have money, you can have success, but your consciousness is what you're building. And when you catch that, you see, you take that everywhere. Just take that everywhere. You're so free. That's what we're here to do. We're just here to get more free. What I understood about Swamiji, which I didn't quite get at the time, but he was free. Everybody I had ever met had boundaries. Like we came to here. I was in this room, I was with some people, they wanted to sit as far away from him as possible. So we were in the back row, almost just about the size of this room. And he walked in like this, and he was everywhere. Just everywhere. I was as far away from him physically as I could be, and he was right there. That was before he spoke. Because he was free. You know, he wasn't like this. I have to be this, I have to protect that, I have to worry about this, I have to hold on to that. I'm running in time. I had a meditation once when I was very upset with someone who wasn't in the room. I'd been upset with them for about 35 years at that point. Ask me how that was working for me. It wasn't working very well. And I was, even though there was no one in the room but me. And then it finally came down to me like this. Somebody owes me an apology. Yeah, like that. Somebody owes me an apology. And I had to really think like, how long are you going to wait for this, and what good would it do? What good would it do? Who do I want to be when I die? Just lying there with my fists clenched like this saying, you still owe me an apology? Where does happiness come from? What causes suffering? That's what we're going to be doing here. All right, my friends?